Hello and welcome to Somerset News Network. Now, if you're clicking on this as part two, please go and watch part one first, as Caroline Stevens, who I'm interviewing, has got lots to say, and we haven't even touched on the Lisbon Treaty yet. So, the part one was brilliant. Caroline, Lisbon Treaty, if we stay in the EU, isn't it a good thing for us?
Oh gosh, the Lisbon Treaty. Well, it's funny how our MPs have not been talking about the Lisbon Treaty, apart from the very fact that triggering Article 50 came out of the Lisbon Treaty. So if you just trigger one part of it, you have to be surely interested in what the rest of the Lisbon Treaty is all about. So we signed it in December 2007. Miliband, I believe, signed it on behalf of Gordon Brown. It was passed through our Parliament. Well, basically, the documents were not put into the House of Commons reading room until the day of the debate. There was a Christmas recess. Then it wasn't debated till mid-January. And as I say, the papers, it's a 3,000-page document, and the MPs didn't have the time to read it. So, you know, they passed it through. It was then initiated on the 1st of December 2009. And it just basically is like a glide path. We're on the glide path to full federal integration, a federal state with the other 27 EU countries. This isn't just about trade. The trade side of things is actually a very, very, very tiny, irrelevant part to the whole, you know, game plan, if you like. So we're looking at New World Order, we're looking at EU military unification. A lot of people think that's an EU army. They think it's some sort of bolt-on EU army. No, no, no. It's all about all our guys and girls from our armed forces integrated with the other countries. And we've already seen our guys and girls land in Bosnia last October wearing EU insignia on their arms. Now, there was intervention by an MP in the House of Parliament after the guys landed in Bosnia, and so the next thing, yes, they haven't got the EU insignia on their arms. But this is all part and parcel of the Lisbon Treaty. They haven't taken us by the guns. They've taken us by stealth, by legislation, lawyers, and all on behalf of the elite.
So how do we get out then? How do we? Because where do we stand at the moment? We've got Mrs. May. We voted 17.4 million of us voted to leave the EU. Both parties said, the Labour and Tories said that they would recognise the referendum and take us out of the EU. Mrs. May deal does not take us out. It puts the country into limbo land while they decide what we're going to do when we come out. So we're not going to be in nor out. Once they've okayed May deal, we won't get any EU funds. So we'll be putting money in and getting nothing out. It costs us 36 billion a year. We only get back 4 billion, so it's net cost to 9 billion a year. Plus, we got the VAT that we put on imports that goes direct to the EU, and we're allowed to keep 20% of it. How can we not get out of this?
There. Okay, so we've got Theresa May, who's been trying to get through her withdrawal agreement, which was written by the EU, and the UK will be in the EU without any members of the European Parliament. Although there are elections coming up in May, and it's anybody's guess as to whether we do send people back. But people have got to understand, who are watching, that it actually makes no difference. It's more symbolic. If we do send people back to the Parliament, they can't actually change any legislation, because the total number of UK MEPs amounts to 8% of the votes. And as you said earlier on in part one, you said that it's not the MEPs that write the legislation, and sometimes those MEPs have to vote on literally hundreds of regulations each day, and the hands up, hands down, hands up, hands down, and they even probably vote for the wrong thing. And that is the truth of the matter. So we've got the EU Court of Justice will still maintain to be the highest court. The Court of Justice will be around for another 8 years. Basically, we are not coming out with her withdrawal agreement, because in a couple of years' time, there'll be another election, and then the people will be voting to go back in. We're being punished here, without a shadow of a doubt. But alongside this pantomime in the British Parliament, this Lisbon Treaty basically says that now we can't have any more referendums according to the Lisbon Treaty. We cannot, in fact, by 2022, it's unlikely we'll actually have any Houses of Parliament whatsoever. And if we do, they will not be in the same format as they are today. We'll just have mayors.
Is that why they want a regional government?
Yes, yes, because the map, a friend of mine went to Germany years and years ago, and she bought a tea towel, and it actually had the UK split into the 12 regions that they were planning all along.
12 regions?
12 regions. So you'll have like a mayor in charge of each one, and they will report directly to Brussels. Now, for anybody at home who's watched the Hunger Games, with the
is this the idea of taking, like, Bristol was a city-state, Bristol.
Yes.
And then you had Gloucester and Somerset. They made it into Avon, South Gloucester and North Somerset. Then they had to split it because it was so corrupt.
Well, we had the MPs in the southwest visit Exeter each year, once or twice a year, and this is to do with the EU. It's funny how our MPs never talk to us about this.
Yes. Well, that's the regional centre for the southwest.
Yeah.
And Bristol was the environment, and Exeter was our other office.
So yeah, so it's the Hunger Games. So we'll have the regions reporting. In fact, part of southern England will be joined on to northern France.
Oh.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Oh, really? Okay. So
Are we getting northern France back, or are they getting us?
Well, I was going to say, we used to own Calais, didn't we?
Right.
Calais used to be part of ours, and you're more up on that sort of thing than I am. So what else have we got in the Lisbon Treaty? We've got the military unification. We've also got the prospect of the City of London, which does not have to adhere to the EU anyway. The City of London is planning to move to Frankfurt, and we've already seen evidence of this because Deutsche Bank has relocated its clearinghouse to Frankfurt. So we are seeing it. You see, if you talk to people about this years ago, and I mean, it was actually one of the MEPs did talk about this in 2009 in the European Parliament. But strangely, these MEPs don't talk about it these days. Until, of course, I started doing those videos. I started in about February time. And then somebody put on my timeline, well, why is it that you've discovered it now? And I said, well, actually, I was talking about military unification way back in, let me think, it had been October 2017. I went to a Tory party conference fringe event. Not that I'm associated with the Tories, but, you know, if you can go to these fringe events, which are linked with the Tory party or the Labour Party, they have some fantastic events. And if you can see them, you can go into them if they're not in the security zone. And this particular one was at the town hall. I think it was in Manchester. And there were a couple of veterans from the Falklands War, and they were obviously really petrified. They were talking about military unification and how they visited the MPs in Parliament, and how the civil servants would come along with these dusty documents from the vaults and expect the MPs to sign. And this was all to do with the EU army. and I remember filming part of it. And the group that organised the event at the time, they put the film up, the footage up, and then within 24 hours, they had to take it down. And you see, they don't want people telling the truth. Yeah. And that was going back to October 2017. And now people in the public eye are only talking about that a year after that. We were alerting all these political parties. Obviously, I've got a network, so I launched this, what I call the Pesco Gate campaign. And I did it with a guy called Dave Ellis and a girl called Carol Hellier. And I have quite a lot of people on a network and an email list. And I'd write to them with template letters, because you have to give people template letters. You had to give the MPs the chance to redeem themselves and say, well, hang on, we're talking about military unification. You need to be aware of this. All the other countries are signing up to this agreement called PESCO. And, you know, we got word back that it was only because of the campaign that I'd launched that we didn't actually sign the final document. But we still turn up to all the meetings, and we are just paraded along, corralled along with the other EU countries. So most of them have signed PESCO, and so it's going to take, so the EU are going to be eventually in control of our military, and they've already got 50 projects going into Africa and so on, where they want the boys and girls to go in there and do whatever. So they're not just content with staying in the EU. And then you see what's happening in France, you know, with the yellow vests. I was seeing footage at the weekend, and you've got a certain type of police force. Nobody knows who they are, whether it's the Euro Gendarmerie, because it's very difficult to pinpoint the exact badge, who they represent. And, you know, setting to with people who are just peacefully protesting, women and children. They took them down into a cul-de-sac, which was cordoned off at the end, and then they go and attack these people. And this is, you know, this is part of the globalist plan. If you don't do as you're told, don't start putting your head above the parapet. And this is why we've got all this internet censorship now, which is going to affect the alternative media. We won't be able to share people's information, make it much harder, because a lot of us do it free of charge.
Yeah, I don't make it. It would be nice.
No, I'm campaigning to get us out. I just need, for my children, for everybody's children, we need to get out of the EU. And I'll tell you something, there'll be a lot of people watching this. Oh, I voted Remain. Are they aware of something called a financial transaction tax?
No. What's that? I haven't heard of that, and I voted to leave.
Financial transaction tax. They've been planning this for quite a long time. They want to put an extra tax on the funds that are being invested by the City of London, and that will obviously affect people's pensions.
Wow. Well, we know that Osborne put through a bill, act, rules, regulations on pensions and banking money, that the government could take it, and that was through EU directives. Yeah,
no doubt. Osborne gets there. By the way, is it my camera or is it your camera? You're moving quite fast.
No, I'm not moving at all.
Oh, right, that's okay. I just wondered if it was going to come out on the film.
I don't know. I'm staying quite still at the moment.
Right, okay. Well, I mean, George Osborne is part of an organisation, the Northern Powerhouse. So, I mean, all these people like Osborne, Adonis, Amber Rudd, these are all, and Kenneth Clark, they're all Bilderbergers.
Bilderbergers, yeah.
Absolutely. So they're basically sorting out the education in this country. You've stopped moving now. It was quite disconcerting then. The screen was just moving backwards and forwards.
That's something to do with the computer. That's not me.
Right, okay. It was making me feel quite seasick.
What I was going to say...
The Bilderbergers. Of course, they have their meetings once a year. And it's rumoured that actually the meeting they have in Watford, there was one in Watford one year, and I think it was 2013. But they reckon that actually the real Bilderberger meeting was probably held a couple of weeks beforehand. And this is, well, why have these secret meetings?
Yeah, well,
it's like going on to Common Purpose as well. These are all these secret societies.
Well, we talk about Common Purpose in a second. When Kenneth Clark went to Bilderberg, it was in The Guardian, I think it was. I wrote to the speaker and said, if a minister of the Crown is going to speak to foreign bodies, governments or business, he should report back to Parliament. Now, I expect other people have done it as well, but Kenneth Clark had to stand up and speak from the dispatch box and explain why he went to Bilderberg. He didn't say anything, but then he's an MP. He knows how to squirm his way out of anything. But the principle was there, that if they go to Bilderberg, they have to report back to Parliament. The
That's
principle
interesting.
has already been set. Now, Amber Rudd resigned.
Yeah.
Amber Rudd went to Bilderberg. Amber Rudd comes back and then gets another position. So she didn't have to report to Parliament.
Right. Okay. Yes, I knew she'd resigned. They used the excuse of the Windrush scandal, didn't they? But I knew it wasn't that. Yeah. Well, it's funny about the Bilderberg thing, because Philip Davis questioned Kenneth Clark once in Parliament. I don't know if you saw that. He's a backbencher. He's quite he's a good egg, is Philip. I like him. And he questioned Kenneth, why was he going off to the secret meeting? And Kenneth Clark, it was a case of, why are you jealous? Did you want to come? And this is just, it's so puerile. And the people of his constituency put him in there because I guess they just voted him in because he wore a blue badge.
Yes.
It's sad. Oh, and I'll tell you something about George Osborne, as a Bilderberger, was giving, of course, he's now out and about with his editorship and everything else. But as chief executive of the Northern Powerhouse, he was giving evidence to a committee, an education committee in Parliament, including the MP Michelle Donnellan. And in fact, we wrote to Michelle Donnellan after last May because Osborne was giving evidence as a Bilderberger. So he's been run by a foreign power and giving evidence to the UK Parliament. That's not right.
No. Totally agree.
And George Osborne, how ironic, a guy who struggled with his maths O level, who goes in Chancellor, and then is talking about education. Aha.
Well, did Kenneth Clark ever do anything any good? He was in education and sort of mucked that up. He was in the health service and that didn't go very well. He was the Chancellor and that didn't go very well either.
But you've got, in Somerset, you've got Liam Fox, haven't you?
That's my MP.
He's known as, you read The Guardian, you will see that he's classed as the disgraced Defence Minister.
Oh.
And he's in charge of Brexit trade deals, really. He's been doing all these deals since about 2012 with Adam, going round the world. He's been doing deals in defence, do you think, perhaps?
Don't know.
And you think we've got military unification? What sort of trade? He was in, was it Saudi Arabia or Qatar the other week? What deals? We want to know what deals he's doing. They always say the devil's in the detail, don't they?
Yeah, well, they can't sign anything until we leave the EU. So all his work's been in vain. Unless it's for the EU that he's working for.
Ah, well.
I didn't say that, did I?
So basically, I went to, at that fringe event for the Tory party conference, I went to one later on in the evening, the year before. And that would have been, let me think, was that in Manchester or Birmingham? was in 2016. So wherever they were, it was either Birmingham, they alternate between Birmingham and Manchester. So I went to the Fringe event. Jacob Rees-Mogg was speaking. Of course, this was just a few months after the referendum. So I stood up, I explained, I said, I'm Caroline Stevens. I was the Brexit campaign manager. And of course, anybody going to see Jacob Rees-Mogg will be a Brexiteer. So I pretty much got a standing ovation for what I did. And then I said, but Jacob, I said, I'd like to ask you a question. I said, we've signed up to something called the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement.
What's that?
Have you heard of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership? Okay. So there was this book that was produced when I was working for Leave EU. We produced 10,000 booklets about TTIP, and it was headed Say No to TTIP. And you'll know, and I'm sure some of the people watching will remember the fact that petition groups like 38 Degrees had launched a petition to stop our government accepting TTIP. In fact, in towns all up and down the country, people gathered with petitions and placards. And in Europe, people took to the streets in their millions. So the TTIP, it got such bad press. But you see, the Trojan horse was, so the TTIP was out in the foreground, but the Trojan horse coming up from the rear was something called the Canadian trade deal. That's what they call it now, but it's actually called the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement. And you can Google it. It's mentioned in some of the Hansard debates. But it was actually, it's very similar to TTIP. And it's got 42,000 American companies have a subsidiary in Canada. So it's just literally across the border. So the agreement is all, it's like TTIP with the special courts, you know, the international globalist courts that can basically bankrupt a national government.
Is this the part where it's the same as if you take money from the EU, you can't say anything against the EU? Is this where if you sign up to this agreement that you can't say anything against these companies? Is this the same principle?
Well, I guess it comes back to lawyers again, doesn't it? Because these courts will be manned by lawyers.
Yeah.
And the lawyers will be working in favour of the corporations. And after all, the governments can get their money from the taxpayers. So they're not going to, it's not, if we said tomorrow, well, actually, Theresa May and her MPs were going to pay out of their own money if they were taken to court under these deals, they might think again, actually, mightn't they? But you see, the UK government, it's UK PLC, we're a corporation.
But it's the same as when I was on the Deer Initiative, an NGO for the government that looked after the problems with the increase in deer population in the country, and it started off with accidents with cars, because there was loads of road accidents. And the AA and the insurance companies wanted the number of deer culled to stop the accidents, to stop the payouts.
Ah!
That's how it started. Well, I wasn't allowed to say, as a member of the DI, anything against the DI because I was a member of it.
Right, okay.
Interesting, isn't it?
It is.
And then when I sit down at the table, I find that all the people who are in the shooting organisations, like I was, everyone bar me have all been in this one big shooting organisation, although they come under different labels. And they're all mates together. And I'm thinking, this is a stitch-up.
Were you just a token gesture?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm only a countryman. I suck straw and toss bales and walk around in fields and do things, and drink cider and things. And they don't think I'm very clever. IQ of 154, and they don't think I'm very clever.
You've got an IQ of 154.
Well, it's between 137 and 154, all according to which test I take.
Do your audience know that? Did they know that before you just declared that?
Who?
Your audience that are watching now.
Oh, no, I don't tell anybody that. I keep that.
You just told everybody in Somerset.
No, I didn't.
But you know, you're talking about, we talked about fluoride earlier.
Yes.
That affects your third eye. Fluoride in the water, there's the third eye, which makes us not as clever as we could be.
Oh.
But I haven't researched all of this, so I'm sure there's lots of other experts out there. But yeah, ask them about the third eye. So basically, so we're looking at the Canadian or the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, and it's got a bad name, has that. So they call it the Canadian trade deal so that people don't know what it's all about. And I went to a presentation in Parliament about it. And so they had the world's press there, and one of the MEPs from the Conservative Party was stood there. He had David Davis in there, Greg Hans, and all the great and the good were there. And they said, oh, it's great, it's the Canadian trade deal. We're signed up to it. Well, I'd only asked Jacob Rees-Mogg this the year before. Why had we signed up to this trade deal in front of this 200 Moggistas, if you like? Why, if we're leaving, why have we signed up to CETA? And of course, there's a deathly silence in Mogg's presence. And of course, how do these politicians tackle somebody being so direct and asking a question, because they're not used to somebody being ahead of the curve and keeping an eye on what's in Parliament? So a year on, I'm at this a presentation with this MEP just before Christmas, and he basically says, oh, it's wonderful. And he just made the mistake of mentioning something called Mode 4. And I said, oh, can I ask a question? So they brought me the microphone. I said, well, it's not really so much a question. I said, but I turned round to the audience and I said, does everybody know what Mode 4 is? And of course, they'd been nodding their heads in approval that this politician being trusted as saying, oh, it's great, you know, we've got Mode 4. I said, well, for the benefit of those who don't know, because obviously nobody seemed to know, I said, Mode 4 will increase our unemployment in the UK. So why aren't you explaining this? And again, totally disarmed, direct question. Never expected in a million years that the woman sat on the front row would ask the pertinent question, what is, you know, do you know what Mode 4 is? Oh, he said, it'll only affect a few thousand people. Oh, right. So he's basically agreed with me. Yeah. So yes, but it's this Canadian trade deal. So I've always said the government has no plans to leave because it signed us up to the Canadian or the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement since October 2016. And this was the trade agreement which the people from the District of Wallonia had protested about. And of course, at this event, oh, you can have as much chlorinated chicken as you like. It's not the chlorinated chicken that I'm particularly interested in at the minute. I'm interested in our national governments being told what to do by the global courts. And you know, we've already seen where, for example, if the energy companies don't get sufficient profits, they will be able to say if the government put a cap on energy prices, those corporations can go to these courts and say, I want to sue the government for the loss of the profits. So the taxpayer will still have to pay. Yeah. So basically, it's got the government just like that.
Well, what happens if we come out of the EU with all these agreements?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of people believe in these e-petitions. Brexiteers often circulate e-petitions. They wanted to come out of the EU now. and all these e-petitions, some of them were debated in January. I mean, people forget there is no requirement on the government to actually debate an e-petition, for starters, even if it gets the magic number of 100,000 signatures.
But it normally goes into Westminster Committee.
Probably goes into the bin more likely, actually. Yeah. But anyway, some of the
normally goes to some small committee where it doesn't really matter.
And anyway, even if they do debate it, it really isn't a debate, because you probably get 24 people turn up. You will, nothing will change. And when people were wanted to debate leaving the EU with no deal, they came back and said, the government actually came back and said, no, we're not leaving now. And anyway, the government has no plans to leave without a deal. They said that. It was all in plain sight in January. So why people think 3 months on, when we still haven't got any closer to a conclusion that we're going to leave?
How do you think that Robin Tilbrook's court case will do? Have you heard about that?
What? But Robin Tilbrook is a solicitor, and so what have we just been talking about? We've just been talking about lawyers. He has to employ a lawyer. So who wins in court cases? Who always wins in court cases?
Lawyers on both sides, because both of them are going to charge you. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So long as I could fight any old case, couldn't I, in court, if I had the money, if I got somebody else to fund it?
I'd like to think he's right, though.
Oh, so but we're talking about Article 50, but we just said that Article 50, Lisbon Treaty, all this should have been, in fact, when they removed the peers into 2000 with the House of Lords Act, this meant that any legislation passed since the year 2000 is actually, including the Lisbon Treaty, null and void. Yeah. So they signed the Lisbon Treaty after 2000. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So how can you fight something when you haven't tackled the fact that it wasn't lawful in the first place? You're just like throwing good money after bad, aren't you? Where do you draw the line? That's the thing. Yeah. Root causes again.
But you see, people say we haven't got a constitution, but we have got a constitution. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a sovereign nation. But we're not a sovereign nation because we're in the EU. We
were taken in unlawfully. Remember, in '73.
Why were we taken in illegally then?
Unlawfully. You'd need to ask Mike Veal about that, I think, wouldn't you?
I don't know Mike Veal. Mike
Veal was the head of Wiltshire Police, and he investigated Ted Heath and the allegations against Ted Heath.
Well, I'm not going to get anywhere there, am I?
Well, this is where people like MPs like James Gray were saying, scandalous, casting aspersions on Ted Heath. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'll leave the people at home to do their own research on Ted Heath.
Yeah, there's lots out there.
You don't want to get sued, do you? Posthumously?
No.
But it's all out there, shoehorned into the EU.
But the thing is, we had the referendum after we were already in, and the referendum was to stay in or leave.
Yes.
And that was the common market, because we're still on the common market then.
Okay, but are you aware? But that referendum wasn't fair, was it?
But then they say, oh, all that we got now was in the European Communities Act. When I was a civil servant, I had access to the library and read the European Communities Act.
Really?
The European Communities Act has got nothing to do with the common market. It says ever closer union.
Right.
And it is, and you read that, it is frightening, because everything that it's in there is what's happened since. It's what's allowed it to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't a common market. It was what it is supposed to, or what they wanted anyway.
Well, didn't somebody ask Ted Heath once, why didn't you tell the people the truth? And Ted Heath said they would never have voted to go in. But he employed all these civil servants to write to the newspapers under their own names and extol the virtues, cheap holidays, I guess, all that sort of thing. Yeah, that was what it's about. But it was about federal Europe. Yeah.
Well, holidays aren't as cheap as they used to be.
They're not actually, because what they do as well now, they used to run planes. They used to fly planes, didn't they? And they used to have the last seats and knock down prices. Now they just don't fly the planes if they can't get enough people. By the way, we're talking about money. With the Lisbon Treaty, it's likely we're going to join the euro by 2022. That's the plan. And, you know, that's it. Game over. We just walked in it. We're sleepwalking, and you see all the people that are sort of brought up to think political parties. Who do I vote for now? Who do I vote for now? And of course, you've got a million little small parties now just set up since the referendum.
Oh, that's another question I got down here. I was going to say, you know, we've got so many anti-European parties. What does this mean, and is it going to split the vote?
Well, it is going to split the vote. You've got the root cause of all our legislation, or most of our legislation now, comes from the EU. If we don't leave the EU, it's irrelevant. These parties they're just showboating, grandstanding, wanting their 1.5 minutes of showcasing in the European Parliament or the Council meetings. It's not going to change anything. And we've got to the stage now where, with the prospect of having a military army, where we've got dissent on the streets and a potential of foreign boots on the ground. And we haven't even touched about 5G, because I know a lot of Remainers will maybe struggle to understand the 5G side of things. Is about making us ill. It's about mind control. The rollout of 5G has never been debated. The 5G itself has never been debated. I noticed that they've mentioned a particular mobile company from China in the news today about 5G, but they're discussing the Chinese impact. They're not actually talking about the medical impacts of 5G, and yet this has been raised in the United Nations.
Didn't they test the 5G in America and found that birds that were flying near it were dying?
It wouldn't surprise me. There's been some reports in, I think, places like Holland.
It's like turbines. Wind turbines may not be killing birds, but they're killing bats. The bat's radar allows them to miss the blades, but when they go the other side, there's a vacuum. Not do something to their brains and they die.
Well, I've seen birds being decapitated as well.
Really?
Yeah. Seagulls.
Well, yeah. The RSPB allowed a wind farm to be put on one of their reserves up in Cumbria, and it's the main flight line for geese.
It's true. So they really care about the environment.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it's like HS2. I mean, that HS2 is actually an EU project. No one will admit to it. It doesn't actually have EU written on the can, on the tin, side of the tin, but it's to link our railway system. It's called the T-Tent project, and it links in with the rest of Europe. Why would you want a super fast train from the north, which doesn't necessarily go into the city centre of Birmingham, just comes outside?
Yeah, just to the university.
Yeah. I don't know why. But I mean, it's going to affect the poorer people in our community, taxation-wise, far more than the people who are actually going to use the train. Why do we need this?
When we had the last Labour government before Cameron came into power, the Labour Party wanted to put a 10% extra cider tax on. So although we got a alcohol duty, they wanted extra 10% on cider. Now, being a Somerset lad and being interested in local Somerset farmers who make cider themselves, I'm thinking this is going to affect them because it's going to put a tax on their goods. So I started something called the Cider Party, campaigning to stop the extra 10% on cider, which I won. I'm not going to say I did it on my own, because the cider producers were also up in arms and the lobbyists got involved. I think they did most of the work. But I was interviewed by the television and the radio in Bristol. And they said, was I going to stand in the election? This is when Cameron got in first. And I said, I don't know. I said, I'd like to. I said, but most of these MPs have got their noses in the trough.
Yep.
Right? And they're acting like village idiots. Well, my wife says I can do the village idiot part all right, and I can bring my own trough. And as soon as I said that, I was ushered out of the studio. As soon as I made a joke of what was going on, I was ushered out. And I wanted this 10% off, and I wanted, we had a manifesto, and we wanted to make cider a part of your 5 a day, because it's pure apple juice. And it's good for you, and it keeps you regular, and I went into all that. But yeah, as soon as I started making jokes about politicians, I was ushered out of the studio.
They need to be wrapped in cotton wool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, you talk about tax. I remember when I stood for Parliament in 2015, and there was concern about the tax on sanitary products. The tax is imposed because of our membership of the EU.
Yeah.
And of course, VAT came into effect when we joined. And they get a proportion of our VAT. So we've become the auditors, effectively, the accountants for the EU. And a couple of years ago, we changed the percentage we gave to the EU because there was a percentage based on gross domestic product. And they altered the definition of GDP to include things like the black market, like prostitution. So estimates that were gained in prostitution and drugs, illicit drugs, the EU benefited from. So it's unbelievable. What a satanic organisation.
So the EU are getting our VAT money?
They get a percentage of our VAT money.
Well, I found out, I wrote a Freedom of Information request for the amount of money that we pay the EU on tariffs of imports. That's how I got the 3.4 billion a year figure. The EU allow us to keep 20% of that, which is 7.7 billion. So it costs us 2.7 billion a year we give to the EU to imports that come into the UK. So now you're telling me that my VAT money, that's 20%, that they're getting a part of that as well.
They get a part of that as well. Absolutely.
So this membership that we pay, which is 13 billion a year, which we only get 4 billion back, which costs us 9 billion. All this other that we're talking about, the tariffs on imports and the bit of the VAT that we give the EU, that isn't included in our membership.
But not only that, but when you say we get a part back, they tell us how we've to spend that money. So you've got lots of people like musicians and artists who are arch remainers because money is being funded into the arts, for example.
Yeah, but my argument there is, if we pay the EU 13 billion and we get back 14 billion, and it costs us 9 billion, it means that although the EU money comes from the EU, which is our money to start with, we will have not 4 billion that the EU allow us to spend, but we will have 13 billion to spend.
Absolutely.
So artists, and the thing is regional development, regional investment. They've got placards saying, we love regional investment. But that's our money to start with.
Exactly.
So if we got that 13 billion in our pocket, we can do with that what we will. So if somebody has paid EU money before we leave, and we leave, in theory, my theory is that we won't stop their money to start with. They will still be paid after we leave, but they will have to justify it.
You could look at it another way as well, though. We have invested over 40 odd years into buildings, into infrastructure. We should say, well, we want a proportion of those building values back, shouldn't we? I mean, they want us to pay this divorce settlement of 39 billion. Why? It's just crazy. We were taken in unlawfully, and as I say, the MP should pay for it out of their own pocket. They should be held to account.
Yeah,
exactly. And what is really sad is that this is supposed to be a Christian land. Around the Houses of Parliament, they have the Lord's Prayer engraved in the stonework.
Yeah.
And I just urge everybody at home to we are in such dire straits, whether you believe or not, I would suggest that we start to say a prayer, because there is nobody on this earth that is going to be able to help us now and get us out of this mess on their own.
So this leaving the EU as we've got it now is the best chance we've got. And we've got to keep the pressure up.
The withdrawal agreement, they say they're not going to leave without a deal. The withdrawal agreement keeps us tied in. Next government doesn't have to adhere to this government. And, depending on how things pan out, as I say, by 2022, there might not be even any general elections. Have you noticed that there's all these Tories and Labour people saying they're dropping out the party? We're having a disintegration of the main political parties, and it's just going to be all into little control groups rather than two main control groups. You're going to have a control group with 5G, and they're all going to be operated by little government operatives. They're controlling each agenda. So it's now for people to wake up and realise that going into these little groups isn't going to save us, and it is back to your Magna Carta.
Yeah. Caroline, you are brilliant to talk to. You've got so much information. I doubt we're going to do this again. Thank you very much. I'm going to put this on YouTube. I'm also going to put it on BitChute as well. And I'm actually getting more views on BitChute than I am on YouTube, which is brilliant, isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ian.